Hey guys, it's Shonda Hunt here, and for a quick second, I want to talk about alpha channels. So, we know we discussed earlier in one of our lessons, we talked about all the channels that are available. We most often work with the RGB channels, as they are the channels that combined create the images that we see. As we can see here, we have the RGB, and that stands for the red, green, and blue channels. But what about the alpha channel? Why is it okay for an image to have an alpha channel sometimes and sometimes it doesn't? The purpose of an alpha channel is so that we can layer an image on top of another image. So right now, I just want to show you an example of this. We have this image here, and we can see that it does not have an alpha channel because the only channels available here are displayed using these symbols, these color boxes that are attached to the image, the read node. So we have red, green, and blue. If I try to layer this image on top of this image, which we see, I get something that's transparent. And that's because this read node needs a solid alpha channel in order to layer properly on top of this image. Think of a channel as a container that contains image data. So it's okay for some channels to be empty, but when you want to layer things on top of each other, you actually need a solid alpha channel. There are several ways to create an alpha channel. Before we go over those though, let me show you the opposite. Here we can see that this render actually has an alpha channel because it has the RG and B, red, green, and blue, which represents the red, green, and blue channel, and then this white box here represents the alpha channel. Now this image has an alpha channel, and if we go to our channels menu, or if we hit A while our mouse is in the viewer, we can see that alpha channel. If we view our other read node, which doesn't have an alpha channel, we're still in the alpha channel set, and we don't see any alpha here. So if we try to layer this image on top of this image, we see that that image layers over that image, the background office image, solid. It's not transparent like we have here. And that's because for this channel, for this read node and for this image, we have an alpha channel. So when you want to layer things, this alpha, your operations are calling for this solid alpha channel when it's deciding how to layer things on top of each other. So you can see the images, but when you, in terms of starting to layer and work with these images, you will need that alpha channel. So I will show you here with the shuffle node. I actually use the shuffle node, and I'll just do this again. So let's create a new shuffle just to show you. So I'm using this shuffle node, and I'm going to delete my alpha channel. So if you hover over it, you see it says, it gives you a description. So I've toggled off my alpha, and now when I try to view that same merge node, we have the same thing that we have here, where the image is transparent, and that's because there's no solid alpha. There are operations that you can use where you might not need a solid alpha, but for merging things on top of each other, you will need that solid alpha. So we can go ahead and turn this off, and I'll show you ways to create that alpha channel if you don't have one. Now, one of the reasons that we're commonly keying green screen footage is because we're trying to extract that alpha channel so that we can layer whatever was shot in our green screen on top of the background image. That's also why we often use roto mats. We're usually using a roto to cut something out. And as you can see, your roto is set to alpha by default, because usually when we're rotoing, we want to cut something out and we want to layer that on top of something. So if I just go ahead and roto this chair, part of the chair, let's say I want this part of my chair, and then let's view our alpha channel through our roto node. we see now we have an alpha. So we can use this alpha channel that we created for different things. We can use it for color corrections. We could use it to extract parts of the chair. So if I go ahead and I say I want to cut that part of my chair out, let's change this operation to mask. So now we only have the chair. And now let's say I want to merge that on top of this robot. Now we see we have that merged on top because we have that alpha channel coming in from our roto node. Okay, so let's look at ways to create an alpha channel. So you can create an alpha channel through a roto. You can create the alpha channel by extracting a mat, basically, which is often used with the roto, or pulling a key. You can also just add a roto to, add an alpha channel to your image right in the read node settings. So if you double click on the read node, the property settings will pop up for that read node. And here we have the option to turn on an alpha channel for that layer. And let's look at what happens down here once we turn on that alpha channel. Now we see we have the indicator that we have an alpha channel in this layer. And if we click on that layer, we now have an alpha channel. So now if we try to merge that layer on top of our robot as we did before, we see that it's solid. So I'll just turn it off so you guys can see. So now that layer is able to fully layer on top of our robot because we have that solid alpha channel. I'll show you another way to add an alpha channel. So if we have our read node, we can also, I use the shuffle node to remove the alpha when I checked on the black box here. Now if I wanted to bring in an alpha channel, I could use the same shuffle node. So let's take a look here. We have our transparent image, and that's because I turned off our alpha for this layer. And now if I turn on my shuffle node, actually if I go to my shuffle node, I can now create an alpha. So if I select this, we now have a solid alpha again, and you can see that image layered on top of the other. And if I turn that off, we see that it's gone. So it's very important to have solid alpha channels when you're trying to layer images on top of each other. Otherwise, you might get something transparent like this, and you might be wondering, why isn't my image layering on top of the other image? And that's simply because you don't have a solid alpha channel, and you do need one anytime you're trying to use the merge over operation to layer things up. So that's why alpha channels are important. That's why we're always creating alpha channels. Alpha channels are also tools. So if I wanted to grade something, I could use the alpha channel as my mask input. I could use any mask. I could use one that's already coming in with an image. So let's just turn on this for a second so we can see. Now I'm grading this image, and my grade node is calling for the alpha channel of this read node. So we see. Now if I connect my grade node to this mask that I created, we'll see that that turns red. So the alpha channel can be used as a tool for your mat inputs. I hope that explains a little bit more about the alpha channels and how the layering systems work. Leave some comments in the comment section if you guys have any more questions about the alpha channel. I just want to do a brief overview so you guys can understand a little bit more about why the alpha channel is important and why it's necessary when you're compositing, because usually when you're compositing, you're always layering things on top of each other. So you're actually always needing an alpha channel to do those integrations.